Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world addicted to noise. Noise from the outside, social media, constant updates, endless conversations. And noise from the inside, worry, fear, insecurity, and overthinking. But I want to tell you something today: silence is not weakness. Silence is power. In a world that equates silence with absence, many fail to understand that silence is one of the most powerful forms of preparation. It is not a void to be filled, but a space to be honored. True preparation does not always happen in the presence of applause or external affirmation. More often, it takes place in obscurity, in the quiet places where no one is watching. Silence creates an environment where your spirit, your mind, and your purpose can come into alignment without interruption. It is not a passive pause, it is a divine positioning. Silence allows us to withdraw from the noise that distorts reality. The distractions of constant engagement, endless scrolling, and superficial conversations cloud our discernment. But when you remove the noise, you begin to hear more clearly, not just the voice of God, but the deep truths inside yourself that have been buried beneath the clutter. It is in silence that ideas mature, vision sharpens, and purpose speaks. The greatest breakthroughs in your life may not come through chaos, but through contemplation. Consider the most profound moments of transformation in Scripture and life. Moses encountered God on a quiet mountain. Jesus often withdrew to silent places before making major decisions. The Apostle Paul spent years in obscurity after his conversion before emerging with revelation that would shape the church. In each of these instances, silence wasn't a delay, it was development. What looked like nothing was actually everything. The wilderness, the solitude. The hidden seasons, these are the spiritual universities where champions are trained. Preparation in silence builds depth. You can build something fast and shallow, or you can build it slow and strong. People who skip silence often rush into places their character cannot sustain. But those who have embraced silent seasons walk with stability, clarity, and strength. They are not easily shaken because their roots go deep. Their confidence is not based on external noise, but on internal knowing. Silence is also the space where distractions die. In silence, you confront your own thoughts, your unresolved questions, your fears, and you wrestle them into surrender. This is not weakness, this is maturity. You cannot conquer the world until you've first conquered your inner world. And that kind of mastery is birthed in silence. So if you're in a season where everything seems quiet, don't rush to escape it. Don't fill the silence with meaningless noise. Sit with it. Learn from it. Use it. Let it stretch you, ground you, and prepare you. Because when the time comes for your voice to be heard, your steps to be taken, and your assignment to be revealed, you will not speak from confusion, but from conviction. You will not move in panic, but in purpose. Silence is not the absence of movement. It is the foundation of destiny. What happens in silence will determine what happens in your future. Most people are busy doing, but few ever pause to ask why they're doing it. In a world that values constant motion, noise, and hustle, silence becomes a rare and precious gift. Yet it is in that silence that purpose begins to whisper. Purpose is not discovered in the clutter of comparison, nor in the demands of the crowd. It is uncovered in the quiet, intentional space where your heart meets your calling. Silence removes the external voices so you can hear your inner one. You were not created simply to exist, to work, to chase success, and then to disappear. You were created for a reason. But purpose does not scream. It speaks softly. It often waits until your soul is quiet enough to listen. When you retreat from distractions and enter a place of stillness, you make room for that conversation to happen. It is in those moments that vision becomes clear, identity is affirmed, and direction is revealed. People who never embrace silence often mistake business for significance. They rush from task to task, meeting to meeting, but lack clarity about what they're really building. They are driven by momentum, but not by meaning. Silence challenges you to pause long enough to evaluate, am I climbing the right mountain? Am I chasing a life that's true to who I am? or one that just looks good to others? These questions are uncomfortable, which is why so many people avoid them. But ignoring them doesn't make them go away. It just delays your destiny. Silence also allows you to connect with God at a deeper level. In the stillness, you're not just seeking success, you're seeking alignment. Purpose isn't created, it's discovered. It is something placed in you before you were born. According to Scripture, God told Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb I knew you, before you were born I set you apart." That means your purpose predates your personality, your education, and even your experiences. But to discover it, you must get still enough to hear the one who gave it. When you embrace silence, you gain access to your assignment. Not a task, not a job, but a reason for being. And once you find it, you live with a level of passion and focus that cannot be faked. You stop running after what everyone else is doing and start building what only you can build. You become driven by purpose, not pressure. Silence is not a waste of time, it is an investment in your destiny. In those moments of stillness, you are not doing nothing. You are doing the most important thing, listening. And what you hear in silence may change everything. In a culture that celebrates those who speak the loudest, post the most, and react the fastest, silence can feel like weakness. But true wisdom is not always found in volume, it is found in depth. And depth is developed in silence. Silence is the environment where wisdom grows because it gives space for observation, reflection, and revelation. It teaches you to listen, not just to others, but to your own thoughts, your past experiences, and to the voice of God. Wisdom is not merely the accumulation of information. There are many educated fools, people who know much but understand little. Wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge in a way that produces life, growth, and purpose. And that kind of wisdom does not develop in chaos. It grows in quietness. It is in silence that you step away from reaction and enter into reflection. You begin to see connections you didn't see before. You discern patterns, identify causes, and understand motives, not just of others, but of yourself. One of the marks of the wise is the ability to stay quiet even when you are right. It takes more strength to listen than it does to speak. Those who are quick to speak often speak prematurely out of emotion or ego. But the wise pause, they consider, they wait. They ask, is this the right time? Is this the right way? Will this add value? And that pause, that intentional moment of silence, is what separates foolish reaction from wise response. This is especially true in relationships, leadership, and decision making. The ability to hear others, not just their words, but their hearts, is a rare and powerful skill. But it cannot be developed in noise. It grows in the discipline of silence. When you learn to sit with someone's words, to reflect before responding, you gain influence. People begin to trust your counsel because it's not impulsive, it's thoughtful. Silence also allows you to hear from God. Divine wisdom is not downloaded in haste. The voice of God is often described in Scripture as a still small voice, not a shout. That means if you want revelation, you must get quiet. You must remove the clutter of constant talking and thinking and create room for God to speak. Many people pray and ask God for guidance, but never get still long enough to hear the answer. Silence is the setting of spiritual sensitivity. Moreover, silence helps you grow in self-awareness. It allows you to process your own failures, lessons, and breakthroughs with honesty. When you reflect on your past without defensiveness, wisdom emerges. When you sit with a scripture or a question long enough, insight arises. So if you desire to grow in wisdom, don't be afraid of silence. Embrace it. Make time for it. Protect it. Because silence is not empty. It is full of answers waiting to be heard by those who will slow down enough to listen. Not all movement is progress. Not all noise is meaningful. In fact, many people are living lives filled with motion but void of direction. They are constantly busy, constantly connected, and yet completely misaligned with their purpose. This is the danger of distraction. It can make you feel productive while actually keeping you from your destiny. Noise becomes a mask that covers up the absence of true vision. The danger is that distraction doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like opportunity. But when you never stop to examine the source of the noise, you risk chasing what's good instead of pursuing what's right. Silence is not simply a break from noise, it is a reset of focus. It is in silence that you can step back from the whirlwind of daily demands and examine where your life is really headed. Distractions are not always evil. They are often simply misaligned priorities. Social media, conversations, entertainment, even ministry or work can become noise that drowns out the more essential voice of destiny. If the enemy can't destroy you, he'll distract you. And distraction is just as dangerous because it delays divine timing and derails true purpose. When you never pause to be silent, you lose the ability to hear the deeper questions of the soul. What am I called to do? Why was I created? Am I on the path God designed for me? These questions require stillness. They require you to shut out the voices of culture, comparison, and even comfort. The truth is, we often cling to distractions because they protect us from facing the discomfort of change. But change cannot happen without reflection. And reflection requires silence. Noise can also numb you. When your mind is always stimulated, your spirit becomes desensitized. You stop noticing the small nudges of conviction. You ignore the soft whispers of guidance. You lose touch with your own heart. But silence reawakens you. It clears the fog. It brings your inner life back into sharp focus. It gives you the clarity to identify what's noise and what's necessary. This is why great leaders, thinkers, and spiritual giants have always valued silence. They understood that external noise often leads to internal confusion. But when you silence the outside, your inner compass resets. You gain clarity on who you are and where you're going. The most critical course corrections in life don't come through public applause. They come through private stillness. So if you feel overwhelmed, scattered, or unsure, the answer may not be more action, but more silence. Don't rush to respond. Don't rush to fix everything. Get still. Get quiet. And listen. Because silence is not just absence, it is alignment. It brings you back to your center, back to your creator, and back to your calling. In a world that constantly urges us to act, to speak, to post, and to perform, the art of stillness is often misunderstood as passivity. But silence is not weakness, it is a form of discipline. It requires strength to remain still in a world that equates value with visibility. The ability to be silent, to hold your peace when everything in you wants to react, is one of the highest demonstrations of self-mastery. Silence trains the soul to respond from wisdom rather than emotion. It teaches you that not every thought needs to be spoken, not every impulse needs to be acted on, and not every battle is yours to fight. Discipline begins in the quiet places. Before great actions come great decisions, and before great decisions come moments of reflection. The undisciplined person acts on impulse. They say what they feel without considering the cost. They move without praying, react without thinking, and speak without listening. But silence teaches restraint. It invites the soul to slow down, to weigh the moment, and to ask deeper questions. Is this wise? Is this necessary? Is this aligned with my purpose? In this way, silence is not avoidance, it is control. Self-mastery is developed when you learn to be still even when you're misunderstood, silent even when you're provoked, calm even when the pressure mounts. This doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means governing them. Emotions are not enemies, but without discipline, they become dangerous drivers. Silence gives you space to examine your emotions without being ruled by them. It helps you process pain without projecting it. It helps you clarify thoughts before turning them into actions. One of the greatest misconceptions is that strength is shown through outward aggression or assertiveness. But true strength is internal. It is demonstrated in the ability to wait, to endure, to walk away when necessary, to withhold judgment. The loudest person in the room is not always the wisest. Often, it's the quiet one who is measuring the moment, observing, listening, and preparing to speak with precision. That kind of silence is powerful. It doesn't come from fear, it comes from mastery. This principle applies deeply to spiritual growth as well. Silence creates space for your spirit to commune with God without the interference of your ego. It quiets the flesh so the voice of the Spirit can lead. Spiritual maturity is not marked by how loud your prayers are, but by how deeply you've learned to trust in stillness. The disciplined believer doesn't panic in the storm. They stand firm in silence, knowing that God speaks in the quiet. So if you want to grow in strength, learn to be silent, not as an escape, but as a practice. Choose your words, guard your energy, rule your emotions. Let silence become your training ground, and you will emerge with wisdom, focus, and unshakable inner power. In silence, we find not just the absence of sound, but the presence of presence. One of the most sacred functions of silence is its power to deepen our connection with God. Noise can fill our heads, but silence fills our hearts. It is in the stillness that the voice of God becomes clear, not because he finally speaks, but because we finally listen. The modern world is saturated with distractions, endless notifications, constant conversations, and external demands that pull us in 1,000 directions. In such a setting, it is easy to mistake activity for intimacy. But true spiritual connection is not built in chaos, it is cultivated in quietness. God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. His voice often comes in whispers, not shouts. Elijah did not find God in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a still, small voice. That whisper requires your attention, not your volume. It requires a heart tuned in, not a mind filled up. Silence becomes the space where your soul opens up to receive not just answers, but presence. And presence is everything. When you sit in silence before God, you're not just seeking direction, you're seeking relationship. Many people cry out to God for breakthroughs, for wisdom, for peace, yet they never make space for God to respond. They fill the air with words, but never allow their hearts to breathe in the response. Silence teaches us to wait. It teaches us that prayer is not only speaking, but also listening. And sometimes the most powerful prayer is wordless, a surrendered heart resting quietly before a holy God. This depth of communion is not passive. It is a spiritual discipline that trains the heart to stay, to wait, to trust. In silence, you develop spiritual sensitivity. Your discernment sharpens. You begin to distinguish between your voice, the enemy's voice, and God's voice. That kind of clarity doesn't come from a crowded calendar or a hurried life. It comes from consistent quiet time, where God becomes the center, not just a part of your focus. Also, silence breaks the idol of self. When you are silent before God, you are no longer performing, explaining, or proving. You are simply being. You are reminded that you are not God, and you don't need to be. You are reminded that control is not your role, trust is. In this way, silence becomes worship. It is a declaration that God is enough, even when you have no words, that your presence before him is an act of faith, and his presence before you is an act of love. So seek the silent places. Turn down the noise, not just around you, but within you. Make room for God to enter the conversation. You will discover that the most life-changing revelations, the deepest peace, and the clearest direction are often given not in the loud moments, but in the quiet ones. In silence, transformation begins. Not the kind of change that is temporary or surface level, but the kind of deep internal shift that alters the direction of your life. Silence is the environment where healing takes root, where pain is acknowledged, and where the soul begins to mend. Many people go through life-carrying brokenness that never gets addressed, not because healing isn't available, but because they never slow down long enough to feel. Silence becomes a mirror. It reflects what you've been avoiding. It shows you what you've been suppressing. But in doing so, it gives you the opportunity to grow. When you allow yourself to be silent, you allow wounds to speak. Not for the purpose of reliving pain, but to recognize its presence and confront it with truth. We often use noise as a shield, work, entertainment, even ministry, to protect us from the discomfort of introspection. But transformation cannot happen where there is denial. Silence breaks through that denial. It invites you to sit in the uncomfortable place where God can begin his healing work. Not through distractions, but through presence. Growth happens when you stop running and start reflecting. In silence, you face your disappointments, your failures, your regrets, but you also begin to understand them. You see how certain patterns have repeated. You recognize where fear took the wheel. You identify what you've been holding on to that no longer serves you. This awareness becomes the soil for transformation. Because what you don't confront, you cannot change. And what you never quiet down to see, you continue to carry. The silence also creates space for God to reshape you. It is the spiritual workshop where the old is stripped away and the new is built. In the quiet, God doesn't just comfort, he corrects. He challenges mindsets. He adjusts attitudes. He convicts in love. That kind of change does not come in crowds or in chaos. It comes when your soul is still, teachable, and open. Transformation is a divine partnership. You must bring your honesty, and God brings his power. Silence sets the table for that partnership. Furthermore, silence helps you realign with your true identity. Many people are performing a version of themselves that was shaped by pain, approval, seeking, or survival. But in silence, all the external roles are stripped away. You are not a job title, a parent, a performer, or even a leader. You are simply God's child. You get to rediscover your worth apart from productivity. And in that rediscovery, transformation occurs. You begin to live from your identity, not for it. So if you desire real change, don't fear silence. Embrace it. Make room for it. Use it not as an escape, but as a sacred pause. Because in that pause, God moves. And when God moves in your silence, he doesn't just change your situation, he changes you.